Hi class. In this video I'm going to go over creating a P5 sketch to create slides for the final project pitch and what's required for the final project. So let's just get started. So we're just going to create a simple P5 project for this. We could use Google Slides or Keynote or something like that, but since we're learning P5, we might as well make our project with P5. So I'm going to go make sure I'm on MMP 210. Click Show in Finder, and here's all our projects. So I'm just going to duplicate the last project I did. So we have an up-to-date index.html, P5, and the style.css. So duplicate this, and I'll just call this pitch. We can get rid of the thumbnail and get rid of sketch.js as well. So we'll just get started from scratch. And let's open that up in Sublime. Let's go ahead and start the Sublime server and open up a new Chrome window. And so I haven't created a link for this yet, so I'll just type it in here. And so here we go. We can start here. And it says generative pattern. I haven't updated that yet, so let's go ahead and fix that. So here is my pitch folder. I'm going to open index.html first, change the title. And finally change the title here. And so that will update our HTML. And so let's go ahead and create sketch.js. So I'm going to save this as sketch.js, make a comment. So this is the final project pitch. So we're going to have at least 5 slides. We're going to have a title. We're going to have a description, a theme, the interact action, or what's going to be used for interactivity, and then the graphics. And you can feel free to add as many slides as you want, but these are our basic slides. And we'll go over the requirements for the final project a bit more in class. We're basically just going to create a few slides, and then we're going to create some buttons to move in between the slides. So we'll kind of review our button code. So we'll start with a variable to keep track of what slide we're on. So I'm going to make var currentSlide, and we'll just start on slide 1. So we'll use this current slide to decide which slide we draw, and then we'll update that slide with a mouse press or a key press. So we also need to know the total number of slides in the presentation, so we don't go past the last slide. So let's say total slides, and let's say there's going to be 5. Feel free to add more slides if you want. Just make sure that you add in the actual graphics for the slides in the draw function. This is just a template. Feel free to work on this however you like. So we'll start with our function setup as usual, and we'll create a canvas. I'm gonna go with a slightly bigger canvas for this one. So we'll do 960 by 640. And then let's go to our draw function. I'm gonna do a darker background than usual this time, so like a dark gray. And then we'll just start with the slides. So our slides will go inside of this if statement. So we'll look at what the current slide is and then draw something based on that. So let's make our first slide. It's just going to be the title for the project. So come up with a name for the project. It can be very simple. Anything that's not just, final project. I'm going to use some placeholders here, but use one that's specific to what you're working on. So we'll start with if current slide is 1. So then we're going to draw some text. So let's call this the title. We'll draw some text. We'll say, let's say for my final project, I'm going to do a new generative landscape. So I'll say generative landscape. And let's be a little bit more specific just to, kind of make it specific to what I'm doing. So I'm going to make it a landscape on Venus. Okay, and then I have to choose a position. Since it's the title, let's center it. So I'll say width over 2, height over 2. So we can see our text is really, really small and hard to read. So let's make it a bit bigger. So let's say the text size is 100. Okay, and let's make it white so it stands out a bit more. And let's align our text in the middle of the screen. So we'll say text align. Center. And it's a little too big. So we could either make there be less text or we could break up into 2 pieces of text. So let's actually just move part of the text down. So I'm going to take this text and just delete the first part And let's just add like 100 to the Y. Still doesn't quite fit, so let's make the text a bit smaller. Let's say 80. And then I'm gonna change the text size a little bit here so it's like a little bit smaller. You know, feel free to do whatever you want here. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine. And it's not quite centered, so let's actually do -50 here and +50 here, so it's a bit more centered. So that looks pretty good. Probably more time than was necessary to create the title, but that's fine. So feel free to, you know, do whatever colors, whatever font you want to make this look a little bit more interesting. You can kind of use this as a template, but feel free to improve on it in however you want to. So now let's draw a button so we can change the slide. Our buttons, we need to draw them, but we also need to update them using the mouse pressed. So we're gonna need some variables for our buttons. So let's start. So I'm gonna say draw buttons here. And so let's add some buttons up here. So I'm gonna say, for the next button, I'm gonna abbreviate button BTN. So for the X position, start on the other side of the canvas. So I'll just say like 960 minus 100, see what that looks like. And for the next button Y, we'll start at the bottom of the canvas. So I'm gonna use the height, which is 640, and I'll subtract maybe 50. And then for the next button width, W for width, let's do 100. And for the next button height, let's say 25. And so let's start with just drawing a rectangle. So I'm going to draw a rectangle. So it'll be at next button X, next button Y. Oops. Next button width, and next button height. Okay, I'm just gonna check the position of that. So it's a little bit too far over on the X, so let's subtract a bit more. And that looks good, and let's move it down a bit on the Y. Okay, too far. Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. It's maybe a little bit more on the X. That's okay. Now my eyes are just playing tricks on me. Well, actually, I think it's because it's using 25. Let's try using 30 as the height. Okay, that might be better. Oops, wrong way. Okay, that looks pretty good. Probably could be better, but we'll just stick with that. We don't need to make it 100% perfect. And since it's a button, we could also add like a nice little radius to the edges. So we've got a little roundness there. And so then we have to decide how the button looks, and we also want to be able to change the look of the button if we interact with it. So let's give it a stroke. Let's say the stroke is blue. And let's say the stroke weight is like 4. Okay. And then we need to make sure to turn off no stroke before we draw our slides. So let's add no stroke up here. And actually, I bet this is going to apply to all the slides. So let's just put it before we draw anything else. Okay, the blue is a little too dark for the background. So let's try a different color. Let's try plum. Okay, that stands out a bit nicer. So then let's draw the text for the button. So for the text, we're just going to say next. And we are going to put it at next button X and next button Y. And the text isn't going to be very aligned, so it's a little too big, first of all. And we also don't want a stroke on the text. So let's start with no stroke. Let's change the fill. We can use plum so it matches the outline. Let's make it a bit smaller. So the height of the button is 30. So let's try 20, or maybe 25. And now we got to move it over. So we can do text align is center to kind of center it in our button. And then we can also use the width and the height of the button to make sure that we have the right space that we want to center it inside of. So I'm actually going to use the same width and the same height for the button. Okay, so that actually looks pretty good. So let's get a hover state. And so this is where the first time we're going to use our collision detection code. So let's just review that real quick because we are going to use it a few times actually. So this is from a couple weeks ago. We made the rectangle buttons for this sequence we made the rectangle buttons for the sound sampler. These ones are going to be a little bit different because we're not drawing from the center. So with our button, we have XY here, and we want to know is whether or not the mouse is inside the button. If it is, we're going to change the way that the button looks. Okay, so if we have the mouse X, we know that it's got to be greater than this line over here. So it's got to be greater than X. And we know that it's got to be less than this line over here so that it doesn't go over the other side. So it also has to be less than X plus the width. Okay, so it's a little bit simpler since we're not drawing from the middle. Same thing for Y. Y has to be greater than this line up here. So mouse Y has to be greater than Y. And it has to be less than this line down here, which is Y plus the height. So my is less than y plus h. So if mouse X is greater than next button X and mouse X is less than next button X plus next button width. So that's the X, and so then we need another line for the Y's. Or you don't actually have to do it on another line, but since you can see the pattern more easily, it's kind of nice to do it this way. So mouse Y is less than next button Y plus next button height. Okay, so if all of those things are true, let's do a different fill. So let's say fill is, let's just use the same fill if we highlight. Okay, and actually let's use a different fill because now we can't really read that text. So let's say the fill is gold. Okay, so now we can see we're kind of hovering over it. And let's also add another state if mouse is pressed. So if we click, then let's change the stroke to gold as well. And I'll just move this stroke up here so we can replace the original stroke. And the gold is a little bright. Let's try just yellow. It doesn't matter a ton what you use here. Okay, so that looks pretty decent. So if we hover over, we get the yellow highlight, and if we click, then it fills up yellow. And so that should trigger the next slide. Obviously it doesn't at this point because it's just the visuals. So remember, the visuals are separate from the actual functionality. So let's add that. So now we need our mouse pressed function so that when we do click the button, we'll go to the next slide. So we'll do function mouse pressed. And first we're actually going to use this same if statement here. So I'm going to copy that. So if we're over next button, and if you want a little challenge, see if you can create a function that will do this instead of repeating the code. So if we're over the next button, so we can go to the next slide, but one thing we have to make sure is that we haven't gotten to the end because we don't want to pass the total slides. So what I'll say is if current slide is less than total slides, then current slide plus plus. So we'll just increment by 1. So that should move to the next slide. And you can see there's nothing there, even though current slide is now 2. We haven't actually added slide 2 yet, so that's what we'll do now. So let's go back up to our slide. So that's our title. Remember to fill in your own title. So since this is a template, I'm going to put that in there. Okay. So then else if current slide equals 2. So if we move to the next slide, then we'll draw, let's say this is our description and our theme. Okay, so we need a little bit of a description of what the project is about, and this should include some sort of theme. So the theme can be a lot of different things. You know, it could be a place or a season or, you know, a type of game, or really anything that you want to do as a theme. Just something that makes gives some framing so we understand what the project is about. So we're going to use some text again. So I'm going to say my project is a generative landscape on Venus that uses P5 shapes and randomness. So, whatever you want to say here, feel free to add more, just as long as we understand what the idea behind your project is and how you intend to implement it. Again, for the project, you can use something that we've done in class already, like the generative landscape or the sound sampler or the self-portrait, and you can kind of improve on that or add more to it. Or you can just make something up completely new. So for this one, I'm actually going to change the alignment. So I'm going to say text align is left, since it's more text here. And then let's make the X position 50 and the Y position 100. Let's see what that looks like. So we can go to next. Okay, so we have to change a few things here. But one thing that's nice about designing this way is I can change the current slide to 2. And so then I don't have to click the button to see the second slide. So let's go ahead and edit this. So we need to change the fill back to, I guess we can do that at the beginning of our slides because we want all of our slides to have the same fill. Well, maybe we wouldn't necessarily. So let's just do fill as 255. And now our text is going out over the side here just by a little bit. So we can fix that by adding a width to our text box. And the way I'm going to do this is just to quickly go over it. So if we look at this as the canvas, and our X starting position is 50. Okay, so that's where our text starts here, and we want it to wrap around to here. We want this margin on the other side to be the same thing. And so the way that I'm going to do that is, since we know the text starts at 50, if I make the width of the text equal to the width of the canvas, so width, then we're going to be too far. It's going to go over. So we need to go back both this margin and the next margin. So that's 50 times 2, basically. So that's going to be 100 total. So we'll start with the width as width minus 100, so 2 times 50. And that looks pretty good. We could actually make the text a little bit bigger here. Oh, that's way too big. I guess the text, that's getting set by this text size down here. So let's make this 50. Okay, that looks pretty decent. I think there's a stroke on there. Or no, because I said no stroke here. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, so then we go to the next slide, and we need a next slide. So for the next slide, we want to describe the interaction. So let's say else if current slide equals 3. So I'm going to use something really similar here. So I'm just going to copy this and paste and then delete this text for a second. And so then describe the interaction. Okay, so the user will generate new patterns by clicking on the canvas. You could also add a button. You could have mouse X, mouse Y. There's a lot of different ways that you can interact. We've gone over a bunch of them this semester. So however you plan the user to interact, I think the rest of this stuff can stay the same. So the main thing here is just changing this text. Okay, so that looks good. And so then we just want a couple slides to kind of show the different types of graphics. So you don't have to build the entire thing. You just have to give us an idea of what the graphics are going to look like. So if you're going to use images, add some images. If you're going to use shapes, add some shapes. So I'm going to copy this one more time, and I'm going to say describe the graphics. And I'm going to say the graphics include circles, just as an example. And so let's draw a circle. And I'll just put it in the middle of the screen. Okay, so we have a circle. So obviously I want you to be a little bit more sophisticated there, use an image or use, some version of what you plan to put in your actual final project. So again, this is just an example. It's not exactly what it should look like. And then for our last slide, let's do one more thing on the graphics. So I'm just going to copy this and paste, and let's just say squares. And I'm going to add a square here. Okay, circles and squares. So yeah, that's basically all of our slides. So we want to be able to do a couple things. So let's set the slide number back to 1. Okay, so we can go next, 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 next. So let's also add a back button in case we need to go back. So I'm going to say var back button. And so we'll put this on the left side of the screen. So let's just put it at like maybe 20 for the X. I forgot to put X. And var back button Y. And let's do the same thing as our next button. So I'll just use the next button Y there. And then I'll use the same width and the height. So maybe I can actually just change this to button width and button height. And maybe I can kind of put these down here. So I'm gonna have to change my code a little bit, but that doesn't really matter because I'm making a template for you guys to use. So let's just change, we do have to change that in a couple places. So this is now button width, this is button height, but it actually makes our code a little bit simpler because our buttons are gonna be the same size. So no reason to have multiple variables there. All right, so we have some good variables for our buttons. So at this point, we need to recreate this whole thing. And if you remember our functions lesson, you're probably thinking, why would I recreate all this whole thing if the only thing that's going to be different is the X and the Y? Literally everything else is going to be same other than this text. Here it says next, the other one should say back. So let's add a function here. Okay, so there's a couple ways I could do this. I could copy this and paste it somewhere else, but since it's at the bottom of my draw loop, another thing I can do is just end my draw loop real quick, create a new function. So I'll call this button. And so let's look at what's different between the two buttons. So first is the X. So let's add an X argument. Then we have the Y. So we need a Y argument. Everything, this is the same, this is the same. The button width and height is the same. Mouse X and mouse Y are just coming from the mouse. We still want to fill yellow, stroke yellow. We still want to do stroke weight is 4. This X and this Y change. These guys stay the same. And then the text down here changes. So let's say text. I can't use text actually because it's a function. So let's just use display text. So let's do that. So the display text goes in text. The X goes for X. And any other time there's an X. Okay, and the Y goes for Y, 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 and Y. Okay, so that looks actually a lot cleaner. And now we can just add our button right back in. Draw buttons. So now we just call the button function. We use the next button X and next button Y. And then the display text is next. Okay, so let's see if that still works. And that still works because we're really still using these variables down here inside our mouse press function. So our button function is really just for displaying buttons. The functionality really is in the mouse pressed. And so we can draw our back button really easily. We just make a new button and change next to back. Okay, change next to back and change next to back. And so we have the next button. We don't have the functionality for the back button. So let's add that in. So this tells us if we're over the next button. So let's just copy this and modify it and say if we're over the back button. And so literally just have to change the variables here. Back button X, back button Y, back button X, back button Y. And then now we're going to minus the current slide. We're going to do minus minus to go back one. And so now we do have to change this a bit. So we want to go back one. We want to say current slide minus minus if we go back, but we don't want to do that if we're already at the first slide, because then you wouldn't see anything. So we can say if current slide is greater than 1. So if it's at 1, we don't want to be able to go back any farther. If it's greater than 1, then we can go back. So that'll prevent us from going, so we can't go all the past the last slide. We can't go past the first slide. So let's apply that same logic to when we display the buttons. So we can't use the back button if we're on the first slide. There's nowhere to go back. So we can use the same logic. So if current slide is greater than 1, then we'll draw the back button. Otherwise, there's no real reason to have it there. Okay, so now we can go next, and then we can go back. We can also do the same thing here and just use the same logic that we did here. So if the current slide is less than the total slides, then we'll draw the next button. So if current slide is less than total slides, then we can draw the next button. So let's see if that works. So if I go next, 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 and that's kind of nice. It's a visual cue that we're at the end of our presentation. Okay, and if we want to be extra fancy, we can add in a key pressed function to move the slides as well. So we can say function key pressed. So let's use our right arrow key. So we can say if key code equals, and then let's look up the key code for the right. It's 39. So if the key code is 39, we want to move next. Okay, so we can say right arrow. And then we do also want to use the same logic here. Okay, so let's just copy this and paste it in here. So now we can use the key press to move the current slide up by 1. And so everything else is actually going to update because we're using a number to track the slides. Okay, so now I'm not actually clicking, I'm just using the arrow key. So then let's do the left arrow. If key code equals, the left arrow is 37. And then I'll just copy the logic for the back button. And there's other things we could do here, like I could put this logic inside of there. You could make a function to deal with those, but let's just keep it simple. So now I can go forward and I can go back. All right, so that's pretty much it for our slides template. So use this as a template. Don't write this whole thing from scratch. I just wanted to go over how everything works in here. So I'll put template in here. But obviously you do need to change the text, okay, to whatever your project is, the description and the theme, the interaction, and then you need to add some graphics in here. You don't necessarily need text on the graphics page. You just need a couple examples of the type of graphics you're going to use. And if you're going to use sounds and stuff like that, try to incorporate those as well. If you're not sure what you want to do for the final project, we can discuss it. So we could go over the different options. I'm happy to talk about it in class or outside of class as well. So that's going to be it for this. Let's take a screenshot of our first slide to use as a thumbnail. And so I'm going to put this inside my pitch folder. So I'll open up my downloads and drag that in there. And I'll call this thumbnail. All right, and let's close these guys. I'm going to open up index.html. And let's just copy one of our project divs. And we're only going to have one link here. So I'm going to change this to pitch and pitch. And final project pitch. So let's go back to our home page. And so here's our final project pitch. So we have a link to that. So that looks pretty good. And we're almost done. It's just this and then the final project. So let's upload this. So I'm just going to go over to GitHub. say adds final project pitch template and commit to master. And I'll push that to the origin. And so we're going to present these in class. So try to have yours ready by the beginning of class. If you need help with anything before class, you can email me, you can message me on Discord, and we can meet to go over anything. So that's it for this video, and I'll see you in class.